What's going on, everyone? Welcome to, well, I guess unpopular opinion. Well, not really, but this is going into the unpopular opinion playlist. Anyway, it's Halloween time, and what better way than to get into the season than to talk about one of the most frightening characters of all time, Hannibal Lecter. So if you guys are like me, you'll love a good scare, and you're morbidly curious by the sick and the deranged. That's why the subject matter of such stories like Ted Bundy or H.H. Holmes are just so interesting, in spite of what your conscience tells you. And Hannibal Lecter is one of the most iconic characters ever. He's been captivating the public since his first appearance in the 1981 novel Red Dragon, written by Thomas Harris. But that was further catapulted to icon status by Anthony Hopkins' portrayal in the 1991 film Silence of the Lambs. And it goes without saying that Silence of the Lambs is much more iconic and more popular than Red Dragon. However, I actually think that Red Dragon is actually evenly matched to Silence of the Lambs. It's hard for me to choose which one I think is better, but let's jump right into the topic of the video. This is Red Dragon, book versus movie. What's the difference? The 2002 Brett Ratner film is actually a pretty good adaptation of Harris's work, but like most adaptations, many things were either changed, omitted, or expanded upon. Today, we're going to discuss the major differences and some important minor differences. Now, assuming that you've either read the book or watched the film, or maybe both, I'm not going to go into huge depths of the plot, but I will be talking spoilers. The plot is about a serial killer who kills families at night during the full moon under his alternate personality in order to transform himself into the Dragon, a character in a painting which he's totally obsessed with, and then the FBI has Will Graham come out of retirement to catch this lunatic before he strikes again. Probably the biggest difference between the movie and the book is how many times Lecter actually appears. In the movie, the film starts with him attending an orchestra, and then he kills a musician off screen who tainted the performance with his bad talent, and he feeds him to his friends at a dinner party. Then we see how he gets caught by FBI agent Will Graham. In the book, however, Lecter only physically appears in 3 chapters and has only one face-to-face encounter with Graham. As crazy as it seems, Lecter is in only 12 pages out of the 443-page book, and that whole act of musical cannibalism we see in the beginning actually came from the sequel novel, The Silence of the Lambs, and the musician he killed was Benjamin Raspail. And on the topic of Lecter getting caught, the movie totally expanded upon the incident. The film features Lecter as a forensic psychologist and a friend to Special Agent Will Graham. Graham and Lecter are working on a psychological profile of a serial killer who Graham suspects is a failed or disgraced surgeon that eats the body parts of his victims. Dr. Lecter deliberately leads Graham in the other direction, but when Graham gets suspicious of Lecter not picking up on the cannibalism aspect of the case, and after looking at a medical book with a page bookmarked sweetbreads, he deduces that Hannibal is the man he's after. But it was too late, and he stabs Graham with a stiletto. Before Lecter can finish him off, Graham jabs him with a bunch of arrows that fell off the shelf and shoots him a few times. Both men lose consciousness until the police arrive to take Lecter into custody, after which Graham is so traumatized and injured that he takes an early retirement from the FBI. The book, however, portrays the incident in a totally different way. The overall outcome is the same, but the context is different. Graham is looking for a killer known as the Chesapeake Ripper, but one of his victims had an unusual wound from a hunting accident way before being murdered, so Graham interviews the surgeon who treated him at the emergency room, Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who at this point has begun to practice psychiatry. The meeting leaves Will with an unusual feeling, so he returns to speak with Lecter at a later time. During their second meeting, he sees an antique medical book featuring the wounded man diagram. The 6 victims suffered wounds that are eerily identical to that chart. That's when Graham knew that Lecter was the killer. Not wanting to face him alone, he leaves Lecter's office to go to a payphone to call for backup, but Hannibal sneaks up behind him and sticks him with a linoleum knife. Lecter is then captured by the Maryland State Police at a later time, so from there, the two have really different approaches to introducing Lecter. The movie had the hero and the villain as friends before the main plot, whereas the book, the first time Will meets Hannibal was when he was investigating the murders he committed. On to our hero, Will Graham. His characteristics are the same in both entities. He's an FBI profiler with a really disturbing gift that he sees more of as a curse, where he can empathize with the mind of the criminally insane, so he can think like the psychotic. He finds this ability to be really disturbing, rightfully so, but he sometimes struggles with these thoughts as he's walking the fine line between sane and crazy. Now, that's shown more in the book, but we do get a taste of that for the film. The biggest difference was how Brett Ratner and Ted Talley make Will Graham a special agent. In the novel, he's an investigator, not an agent. He never attended the FBI Academy as a student. A minor thing that was changed for the film was his family. In the movie, he has a wife and he has a son named Josh, but Book Graham, he married a widow, and her son's name is Willie. Therefore, he's a stepson, but no kids of his own. In the book, the first chapter begins with Jack Crawford visiting Will at his home in Florida, years after he retired and caught Lecter. Crawford convinces Graham to come out of retirement to help him catch a new killer, the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy already killed 2 families and mutilated their bodies at night during the full moon. He breaks into their houses, smashes their mirrors, and places the shards in the victims' eyes. Then he performs necrophiliac acts to them. He gets the nickname from his unusual habit of biting his victims. He isn't a cannibal like Dr. Lecter, but the bites he leaves on the victim are more of a signature calling card. Besides starting much earlier in the story, the movie and the book start to begin sharing their similarities here. In the book and film, Graham is able to discover some new forensic evidence, but hits a dead end. This is where the differences start to begin again. In the movie, Jack Crawford suggests Graham consults Hannibal Lecter to help him in the case. Graham sees Lecter in the hospital, and Lecter agrees to help, after which Graham visits him 2 more times, where Lecter provides his usual charm and unique type of insight. The novel has Graham making the choice to visit Lecter on his own, in order to get back into the old mindset of how the criminal thinks, not necessarily out of wanting his help and psychiatric insight on the case. When he visits the doctor, the encounter is mostly the same, but they don't actually see each other again. Lecter in the novel is actually quite different from the movie. In the book, he's described as having black hair and red eyes. Also, Hannibal Lecter has 6 fingers on one of his hands, but that wasn't specified until The Silence of the Lambs. After that, the only 2 times we see him are when he tricks his secretary into giving him Graham's home address, and then when Dr. Chilton punishes Lecter for endangering Graham by giving the killer his home address, where Lecter taunts him by revealing how a rejection slip from the archive for Chilton was sent to him by mistake and that he read it. Those were both shown in the film basically the same way. Lecter's impact on the plot is for the most part the same as the movie. He gives Graham some advice on the case, but ultimately goes cold and begins a secret correspondence with the Tooth Fairy and sets him loose on Graham's family, and then he taunts him by sending him a letter afterwards, hoping he isn't too ugly.
We mustn't judge too harshly, Will. It was his first time. Have you never felt a sudden rush of panic?
The majority of Hannibal Lecter's scenes were totally invented for the film since he became such a popular character. The filmmakers realized there need to be more Hannibal. So, scenes like Will seeing him in the hospital's indoor courtyard, or the last visit where Graham offers Lecter a fancy meal, straight up never happened in the book. Some of the dialogue Lecter had was actually from another character in the book, Dr. Alan Bloom. So, needless to say that Dr. Lecter in the novel offered little, if any, help on the case, as opposed to the film where he helps Graham and gives him multiple clues. Lastly, Lecter's cell in the film is made of bulletproof glass, where in the novel, his cell is equipped with standard prison bars with a nylon net secured from the ceiling and the floor between the bars and him. That's there to prevent him from reaching out and grabbing anyone or anything beyond his cell. Now, let's talk about our main villain, Francis Dollarhide, aka the Tooth Fairy. He's actually adapted almost totally the same. The only real difference is how in the novel he's blonde and he's in his middle age. He's portrayed masterfully by Ray Fiennes, but he has brown hair and isn't actually middle-aged. The novel shares his full backstory. He was born in the 30s with a cleft lip and palate. His mother didn't want to take care of him, so he was sent to an orphanage. He was later placed in the care of his grandma, and as she aged, her mental health began to deteriorate. And she took it out on young Francis, and one night when he pissed his bed, out of rage, she took his penis and actually placed it in between some scissor blades, threatening to cut it off if he did it again. And then after that, he went to live with his estranged mom with his step-siblings, which ended in horrible treatment and abuse, which further damaged his mental state. And then he killed his sister's stepcat, which got him sent back to the orphanage. When he was 17, he got into some legal trouble, so he had to join the military to avoid prison. He's sent to Asia, where he learns how to develop film, and then he gets cosmetic surgery for his cleft lip and palate. Later in life, he sees the famous William Blake painting, The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed in Sun. He becomes totally obsessed with it, and he believes that the dragon in the painting gives voice to his alternate personality, which he then gets a full-body tattoo of the dragon on his back. In the novel, we actually get to see the dragon and Francis speak with each other, and they struggle for control over his mind. The movie had a voice actor for the part of the dragon, but director Brett Ratner decided to leave that out, which I don't blame him for, because seeing Ray Fiennes act alone and talking to an unseen persona just makes it feel more creepy and realistic. But actually knowing how the conversation between the two personalities in the book went is actually pretty cool. Now, Many of those things aren't explicitly stated in the movie, but there are some Easter egg scenes and little details dropped that people who've read the book can easily pick up on. In both mediums, he works for a home film processing plant, which he uses to identify and choose his next victims. But he falls for a blind co-worker, and that conflicts with his homicidal urges, and it inspires him to destroy the red dragon painting to eliminate the evil part of his personality. The timing of when he begins to date his co-worker is moved a little earlier for the movie, but overall it makes no difference. The thing about him finding a girlfriend in the movie is Dollarhide's actually a handsome man despite his birth defect, and it's revealed that some of the women at his job find him mysteriously arousing, as opposed to the book, he's described as ugly and as just unappealing despite being jacked. So him getting with a blind coworker in the novel makes much more sense, since he doesn't have women wondering about him. And given that the Tooth Fairy is a highly deranged individual, he writes a fan letter to Dr. Lecter. The letter is the same in both mediums, but what is omitted from the movie is that the Tooth Fairy wants to kill Lecter in order to absorb his power and become larger than he is. That was an interesting point in the book, and I kind of wish they brought that to the movie. A minor difference I want to share is the scene where Freddie Lounds is kidnapped and the Tooth Fairy exposes himself to him while showing pictures of his murders. It's the same almost word for word, actually. You know, he secures him to a wheelchair, he exposes himself to Lounds, and then he forces him to recant the things he'd written about him in the newspaper article. Then he bites off his lips, sets him on fire, and rolls him into the National Tatler's lobby building. The only difference is the movie implies that Lounds dies immediately after, whereas in the novel, his counterpart survives long enough to speak to the authorities. I think the biggest difference of the plot between the two is the finale. Both of them have a double climax, which featured Dollarhide kidnapping his new girlfriend and setting his house on fire, where he stages his death in order to trick the FBI. Graham goes back home to find out it's too late, that Dollarhide is still alive, and then he gets ambushed. In the movie, Will goes into his house to look for his son and sees his bathroom mirror smashed, and his answering machine plays a message from Jack Crawford explaining how the Tooth Fairy faked his death by planting the body of a dead coworker in his burning home, only to be discovered by the cops. In the book, the body discovered in the house was a gas station attendee, but anyway, Dollarhide has Josh, Will's son, hostage and threatens to kill his family in front of him, which leads to a psychological confrontation between Graham and Dollarhide as he uses his childhood trauma to provoke him into a fistfight, leading Graham to get slashed across the chest and Dollarhide getting a knife in the leg. Will and Josh run to safety, but a shootout erupts where Graham is hurt really bad and his wife has to finish off the killer. The book has a really different and more depressing ending. Graham is walking back to his house from fishing when Dollarhide easily overpowers him and stabs him in the face. His wife rescues him by beating him with a fishing pole. Yeah, he chases her and she runs into the house, finds a gun, and kills Dollarhide. Will is in critical condition and permanently disfigured. In the film and novel, Lecter does send him a taunting letter saying he hopes Will won't be too ugly. It makes more sense in the book since Will's injuries were to the face, whereas Edward Norton's appearance was the same. In the film, seems like Will is able to put the experience behind him and now he enjoys his old life, where the novel and the sequel explain that he's never able to recover both physically and mentally and becomes totally depressed and then turns to an alcoholic. And the letter that Lecter sent was intercepted by Crawford and burned. But personally, I like the movie's ending better, not just because it was a happier ending, but because throughout the book, there was a lot of suspense and a lot of tension, and it's just building from the beginning. But the climaxes were really short-lived with minimal action, whereas the movie, it had an exciting sequence which was really thrilling to watch. Even if the gunfight was kind of exactly how it was filmed in Silence of the Lambs, having a character fire point-blank range at the villain, only hearing the actions of the guns and the bullets whizzing by, but not hearing the booms or bangs you'd normally hear. However, I think it was to better effect this time. Guys, that's it. Those were the biggest differences between Red Dragon, the movie, and the book. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Guys, if you'd like to see more movies versus book videos, comment that below. Or if you want to see a movie versus movie review between Red Dragon and Michael Mann's Manhunter, the first adaptation of Thomas Harris's novel, comment that too. I'd be more than glad to make that. Like always, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Unpopular Opinion.